Leaf, without any possible doubt, is one of the few visual novel developers to truly achieve legendary status. Through classics like the Utawareru Mono Trilogy, the Two Heart series, and White Album 2, the studio has long established itself as creators of hit after hit, supplemented by beloved, albeit less influential releases like Tenshin no Inai Junigatsu and Tears of Tiara. But every legend has a point of inception, and Leaf's goes all the way back to the very start of 1996. In January of that year, the then floundering studio had previously only made a forgotten mahjong title and an RPG, took a bet on a new writer leading a new project. Inspired by games in Spike Chunsoft's popular sound novel series on the Super Famicom, writer-director Tatsuya Takahashi and artist Minazuki Toru, along with a handful of composers and programmers, created something that, as the legends go, took the adventure game genre by storm. That something was the first entry into Leaf's brand new visual novel game series, Shizuku. Shizuku is an important game for a lot of reasons, many of which are more complicated than the simple legend that internet blogs have bestowed upon it decades later. It's the game that supposedly marked the end of the more complex adventure games of the era, the one that set the path forward for the simple, choice-based visual novels we see now, yet we see those continue on into the modern day. It's seen as the origin of visual novels as a genre, yet the legacy of that genre goes back at least a decade prior to this. And perhaps most elusively to the English side of niche otaku subcultures, it's the game that is pointed to as birthing the beloved Denpa subgenre of psychological horror, a subgenre which has seen a surge of interest thanks to titles like Tsukihime. And yet, the history of Denpa is a lot deeper than just this game, stretching back to at least the 80s. That's not to downplay its accomplishments though, nor how special it was for the time. And for starters, it was one of exceedingly rare instances of a horror adventure game that deviated from what was expected of sound novels, taking a notably more psychological approach which surprised readers at the time. Also, in contrast to those was the greater focus on visual elements, particularly forgoing the silhouetted sprites of Chunsoft's offerings in favor of detailed contemporary anime artwork, hence leading Leaf to deem the games as visual novels. While that term has taken on a life of its own in Western spheres, and that popularity in the last 2 years has fed back into Japanese marketing, it was only a unique brand label for Leaf series for the longest time, adopted briefly only by a few authors heavily inspired by their works. Maybe most notable is Kinoko Nasu, with the original release of Tsukihime describing itself as a visual novel, though plenty other developers, even if less blatantly, were also inspired by Leaf's early works like this, like those who created Clannad and Canon and Key. There's definitely no doubting that even if this isn't the first visual novel, that moniker itself confuses the history of the adventure game genre, and even if this game isn't quite the origin of Denpa, Shizuku is a work that got the creative juices flowing for countless artists in and curious about the ADV game industry. And while its contribution to that legacy is admirable, it doesn't say much about the game itself. Look, I try to be positive on this channel, especially when covering games that people have asked me many times to talk about. I always want to see the best in games and I want to give them good reviews, and I at least want to highlight aspects I like. And Shizuku has some. The soundtrack is great, the art can be gorgeous, and Takahashi's script showed potential for him to be something great as a writer, as he'd soon prove himself to be with other Leaf titles just a few months later, and with a strong career in anime. But Shizuku is not a good game. It's a visual novel that wants to be a commentary on the pain of trauma and the monotony of life, a psychological horror mystery that wants to have a cool school-themed twist, and an adventure game with simplistic yet interesting mechanics. But it does not one of those things even passably, failing at the finish line and sometimes not even getting a foot in the race before taking a step backwards and stumbling into a trash compactor. It is a messy, flawed, frustrating, boring, and at times even downright insulting game that fails at everything it wants to be, and one that I want to try and explore as fully as possible, to see how and why it fails where so much after it succeeded. So, without further ado, let's finally dig into one of my most requested titles and explore it deeply. How it did or didn't create Denpa, how it did or didn't kill adventure games, and how it, well, does fail at being a captivating story. Let's finally explore Shizuku. Set in then-contemporary Japan, Shizuku follows a peculiar day in the life of one Yusuke Nagase, a high schooler who often retreats into fantasies of destruction to escape from what seems to be a dull, never-changing, never-ending, empty life. That is, until something no one could have imagined happens. A popular girl in his class, Kanako Ota, suddenly lost her mind and injured herself in front of everyone, screaming lewd obscenities the whole way. Soon after the incident, school teacher and Yusuke's uncle, Genichiro, calls him over to help him investigate just what might have led to Kanako's sudden mental collapse. collapse? Was it drugs, mental illness, stress, or maybe something deeper as hinted by her journal, which talks of mysterious nightly gatherings and an inability to hold out any longer? Taking on this case soon leads Yusuke to make acquaintance with free girls who may have something to do with it all. Saori Shinjo, a peppy school volleyball star who saw one of those gatherings late in the night, Mizuho Aihara, a quiet girl who was close to Kanako, and Nuriko Takashima, a former school idol who became a recluse roughly 1 year ago for reasons unknown to everyone. Through facts made apparent by the three of them, it's clear that something sinister is happening here, yet the questions keep piling on. Just what is behind Kanako's sudden collapse? Why did she lose her mind in class? What are the mysterious radio waves, or Denpa, that Ruriko is on about, and why did she change so suddenly? And what are these mysterious gatherings happening at night for, and for what purpose? For Yusuke, the only path to the truth is to venture out on his own and discover what horrors truly await. If there is anything I can give Shizuku credit for, it's that the intro of the story is legitimately engrossing. That opening hour, even if a bit drawn out, starts with a bang and sets up an interesting mystery that feels like it's gonna go places while still being down to earth. And despite having a rough idea of some elements at play, the whole Denpa thing is half the reason this game is famous, the prose alone was enough to keep me engaged. Despite this being Takahashi's first attempt at writing for a game, or any sort of big novel as far as I'm aware, the prose is at worst functional and at best evocative and creative, with a unique style that separates his writing from the works that inspired him, as well as many other adventure game writers of that time. Shizuku paints a picture of the world that feels like peering into the mind of someone deprived of much joy in their life, using contrast to great effect. Sentences often come in pairs, contrasting and doubting each other, contradicting the main character's own emotions and beliefs. Some sections feel more like reading someone's unconscious rambling stream of thought, while others are thoughtfully constructive and complex. It's all tied up a great sense for rhythm and flow, which makes for, on a technical writing level, a script that is especially impressive for a first work. So it's unfortunate then that the characters as pro services lack that same level of depth. With some exception to Ruriko and the culprit, this cast is painfully one-dimensional and simple. Yusuke's uncle is the chill middle-aged man, Saori is the peppy energetic girl, Mizuho is the quiet sad one, and that's all you're ever gonna get on them. They are the most basic approximations of people needed in order to have a story functioning on the most simple level, and sadly, even our protagonist is like this. Yusuke is the spitting image of a cardboard cutout made for self-inserting, who only displays as much emotion as is needed in order to progress the plot. If things are normal, then he'll just drift around and investigate. If a woman is in danger, then he'll feel rage and protect her, or feel like he's failed when he can't. And if the story calls for obligatory lovemaking, then he'll suddenly fall in love with one of the women on a dime. The most depth he ever gets is in the handful of scenes where he delves into his own world of madness. Those unhinged ramblings about wishing for the end of society and idealizing death, and vaguely meaningful thoughts coaxed in a veneer of pessimism and scorn, are the closest I think this game comes to capturing the idea of Denpa that people have in their mind. That embrace of madness and depravity, declining mental health, and an obsession with the bizarre all work well to bestow the headspace of someone worn down from the misery of dull daily life upon the reader, making for by far the most entertaining part of the game. I don't think it's quite as thought-provoking as some segments from later Denpa titles like Sayoshi or Jisatsu 101, but it's nonetheless well done and definitely where Takahashi's writing talents shine through the most. So it's unfortunate that maybe 10% of the game is like this. I'd wager 45% is the mess of a mystery, and the remainder is put towards building up bone-stock romances of the game's free love interests, Saori, Ruriko, and Mizuho. Love just sorta happens here. At one moment, Yusuke and his girl of choice are investigating the mystery and maybe getting into some danger, and then the next, they're alone banging in a gymnasium and telling each other how much they're into one another despite having met literally that same day. It all feels so devoid of emotion and purpose besides fulfilling some basic obligation to have romanceable characters, with not even Ruriko bucking the trend despite her getting a fraction more development by the true ending. Which, for what it's worth, the true end is something this game did invent the concept of. Shizuku's structure is heavily inspired by sound novels, with choices the player can make to influence where the game ends. Those games didn't really have defined roots though, just a story that altered based on various decisions and led to various endings, without following one particular locked course after a given point. Shizuku, in contrast, has the basic notion of a route for each heroine which diverges off of a common path, with their own unique full endings and some bad ends along the way, and then never before seen in the genre, a canonical true end, here in the form of Ruriko's very last ending. All of that, in theory, is supposed to add together to form an overarching grand mystery narrative that wraps up nicely in the end, one that resembles modern-day visual novel structure with each of the three routes giving you a piece of the puzzle. But that theory has more holes in it than Swiss cheese. Shizuku's plot structure is that every single route follows the same core beats with a couple notes swapped out to make sense for who's tagging along with Yusuke, with the main mystery of the game explored almost entirely within the aforementioned core beats. Once you've finished a route, you know almost the whole story, doubly so if you read Ruriko's route first, which contains the only chunk of content that Mizuho Mizuho and Saori's doesn't and wraps the entire mystery up. This is assuming you don't get the first bad ending too, as somewhat infamously, Leaf's head at the time requested that players be able to reach an adult scene within a few minutes of starting the game, which Takahashi achieves by adding in a bad ending that occurs super early on. Except this end spoils most of the mystery and how it works, along with the identity of the antagonist if you're playing a later release that has voice acting. The other bad ends aren't much better either. Many contain most of the same content as the normal endings, but with a different start and different end. A character might die in the bad end and live in the good end, but everything leading up to that plays out almost identically. And for the ones that aren't a way to artificially inflate playtime, well, they're just an excuse to shove more adult content in. From an adventure game design standpoint, this is mind-bogglingly bad usage of a branching structure. This wasn't new for the genre, it's something that had been well established even if not in this exact character route way. Games, mystery games even, with well-designed variable endings with plot, were common in and outside of the console sound novel sphere, and developers like Elf were already toying with the idea of specific character paths in games like Hisaku before Shizuku released. And from a mystery standpoint, the game often feels like it's insulting your intelligence as each route is written without the assumption you've played another one. They all branch off the plot well before much is known about the mystery besides girl went mad, so the game repeatedly tells you the same information and acts like you should be totally surprised. Literal screens of text and full scenes are just copy-pasted across routes and endings. Whole sentences, phrases, it gets a little exhausting. And maybe I could forgive a lot of this if the game at least had something like a good atmosphere, but Shizuku is painfully boring. Action scenes are written like you should be excited, but so uninteresting as to be boring. Horror segments are written to be scary, but none of them instill any sense of dread. All the romantic scenes are written as if they're loving, but the characters have no chemistry. Even though the prose is good, and Takahashi later proved himself to be capable of writing all these things super well in future games, this prose cannot save an uninteresting and structurally broken story. It also can't save a story of tonal whiplash as bad as this one. And Shizuku feels like it's torn between wanting to have lovey romances with cute archetypical girls and being a serious horror mystery, doing neither well. It constantly flips between high-energy conversations with the girls, moments of madness, shoddily written erotica, sad emotional moments, and quiet sleuthing, all with the subtlety of a hand grenade filled with glitter. It is simultaneously one of this game's biggest flaws, and one of the things that keeps it from being a complete slog to read, because it can, at times, verge into so bad it's good B-movie territory. Double cheeseburger, a bacon and eggs burger, meat, 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 meat! If you ever play Shizuku, then I recommend just reading Ruriko's path. You can read Mizuho's if you want, it's got a few common events that Ruriko's doesn't and some strong character moments, but Ruriko is the only route which forms a complete short story. Reading just that also saves you the hassle of doing tons of rereading to 100% the game. Shizuku took me 11 hours total to see everything, and that felt like 1100 despite reading at a medium to high pace. It often feels like it takes the prose a dozen sentences to explain something that should only take one, and some scenes drag on while others fly by with absolutely no sense of rhyme or reason. It really feels like Takahashi read a few stories, wrote a first draft to his own, and they just shipped it as is. And I want to draw particular attention to that concept because this is a game that wears its inspirations on its sleeves. Shizuku in many ways feels like a messy fan fiction of rock musician, writer, and subculture weirdo Otsuki Kenji's most famous novel, Shinko Shukyo Omoideyoshi. Released in early 1993, it's a story about a depressed and disillusioned high schooler, Jiro, who finds himself entrenched in the mystery behind the sudden departure of one of the school's students, Natsume, where this leads him is the discovery of a cult named Omoide, which he's fallen into and ends up educating him on, about their leader and communication with a god, their unique practices and the people who follow them, and their secret superpower of using Denpa powers to make people go mad. It sounds absurd, but for her, the cult gives her a purpose that she can't deny, that she is someone special, the one thing she wants to be above anything else. Just from that alone, it's probably not hard to see where parallels start coming in, with some Japanese readers even making whole web pages dedicated to cataloging similarities. The protagonists are both teen guys disillusioned with their dull lives and becoming resentful, both have women with major story roles who supposedly have superpowers and who both feel detached from society, and most obviously, those superpowers work identically through Denpa magic. Some might say that alone would make Shizuku a ripoff, but I don't think that's quite accurate as the two diverge quite heavily in execution. For starters, Shizuku doesn't really talk about cults at all. It always feels like it's headed that direction, but it's never broached, certainly not in the same way that Omoide makes it a central focus. Thematically, they also go different ways. Omoide is about the innate absurdity of life and society and the challenge of accepting that life may not have any grander meaning beyond mere existence. Shizuku does touch on the latter in Saori's route, questionably well at that, but it also wants to ultimately be about cycles of abuse and forgiveness. Lastly, Shizuku is way less of a downer than Omoide. I don't think I ever felt depressed reading that thanks to some smart dark comedy and some self-seriousness, but the atmosphere is pretty dour on purpose. It's Kenji's commentary on the way cults and punk subcultures gave youths false hopes about the importance of their lives, complete with a pessimistic, hopeless ending. By contrast, Shizuku might be dark, but it's far from a pessimistic work, even going as far as to craft a happier end for its main characters, as if Takahashi was saying, yeah, I can fix her, but, well, we'll get to that. But besides the mess of an ending, it's also way more tonally all over the place as mentioned a moment ago. That is to its disadvantage, sure, but it can create some budget movie-esque contrast that lends a bit of fun to the title here and there. I just wish that fun was more common than it was, because I still think a majority of the game is absurdly boring, which sadly includes the adult content. Let me be clear that I am far from someone who dislikes this stuff. If I were, then I wouldn't review games sold for a mature audience for a living and regularly plays their adult content. Trust me when I say Shizuku's scenes are, at best, titillation for the sake of titillation for those who like non-consensual humiliation, all dragging on for way too long. Even speed reading is exhausting. At the very least, I don't think most of them are anything worse than you're gonna find in other humiliation-themed eroge. There was only really one that I found deeply uncomfortable, and I kind of knew going in based on the bad decision that triggers it. It's generally just boring and tiring and hard to say much about because it's all so nothing, yet there's so much of it, constantly grinding the plot to a halt and only further ruining the already sketchy pacing. At least, in contrast to that, I can be positive about the aesthetics of the game, I guess. Shizuku is one of those games where I think the general feel of it has far outlived its actual content, specifically as it pertains to the original PC-98 release. The way the filtered real photo backgrounds turn the varying shades of monochrome contrast against the amateurish yet stylish character portraits, the chunky high-resolution font that eschews the terminal-esque look of the 98's own built-in font, and an interface that feels so close yet so far to what's considered normal now for novel format visual novels, all gives it a sorta otherworldly feel, caught between the burgeoning Windows era of VNs and the dying PC-98 era of VNs. While I don't think it has the same wow factor that the gorgeous pixel art of earlier titles like Dragon Knight 4 or Only You present, it is still lovable in its own right, with the CGs in particular standing out. Like, that shot of Ririko on the skull rooftop is iconic for a reason. It's enchantingly beautiful and terrifying, full of warmth yet emptiness at the same time, seeming to understand her character far better than even the writing consciously does. For as much as I enjoy how this version here looks, however, it is woefully dated in quality of life, lacking basic features even contemporary adventure games offered. There's no text skip features at all, and save slots function like saves in many console titles, one per playthrough, so expect to spam the enter key to speed through dialogue until you can reach a new choice. Thankfully, the renewal edition of the game fixes both of these problems, even if text skipping still isn't great. It's kinda slow, and the skip-only red text option tracks based on entire segments and not individual text, so it'll just randomly quit working because you stumbled into a part with one single unique sentence out of 200. You can just enable global skipping to solve that, but it's still a bit clunky and requires being able to parse text quickly, which for what it's worth isn't that difficult to do. Shizuku, like a lot of PC-98 games, uses pretty simple Japanese for the most part, so it's not an awful choice for a first or second title to read, assuming you actually want to read this. Most interesting to me, though, is the complete visual overhaul that Renewal gives the game. It is a gorgeous title that does the original artistic vision justice, with pretty backgrounds, beautiful character sprites, and some stellar CGs. Compare the original Ririko Sunset with this version. I personally prefer the latter, even if the former is still some gorgeous pixel art. The composition of the shot here accomplishes that same vibe of a distorted reality in a different yet equally wonderful way, and the way each element is separated for an animated introduction to the CG is a remarkably cool use of newer technology. I also think the character designs just look a lot stronger here. Their expressions feel more defined and emotive, the clothes are lovingly detailed with little bits of creasing and rippling, the softer colors and smooth shading lends the game a very modern sheen. It's all in all really well crafted for its time while still retaining a bit of that 90s feel for good measure. And the music, too, retains a lot of its soul while still feeling up to date. Shizuku's soundtrack is about as iconic as the art, if not even more so. While it's often kinda questionable how well the music fits in at the game, further contributing to the total inconsistencies, it does elevate a lot of moments in the general atmosphere when it works, which is to say nothing of the tunes themselves and how brilliant they are in any incarnation. The original FM synthesized score for the PC-98 is fairly typical chiptune for the platform in terms of instrumentation, eschewing any complex sounds or deep usage of the FM sound chip like was starting to become common at the time, but I think there's a unique charm to that sort of sound design, and it's far preferable to the number of titles with weird and abrasive soundtracks. But that's only the FM score. It also supports MIDI music with an external soundbox for more realistic instruments and a different feel, with the good old Roland sound canvas seeming to be the device of choice. And honestly, I think it's one of the best SC55 scores around. It makes some incredibly creative use of the Sim's limited sound set to really bring the compositions to life. The surreal, dreamlike soundscapes of Seishin Sakai, the sleazy jazz-influenced sound of Genichiro's theme, the weirdly funky and over-the-top theme that plays for some big mystery-solved moments which doesn't really fit in the game at all, and Ririko's theme is so damn good. Sakai ga Kawaru Toki, often translated as When the World Changes, is probably one of the best best pieces of VN music from the 90s, and certainly one of the most iconic and remixed. It's haunting and beautiful, solemn and warm, and all as one might expect from future composer for Key, Shinji Orito, the guy that makes songs that every time I hear them I have like a Pavlovian response and have to cry. Even if there is little positive I can say about this game, I can at least say that When the World Changes is a wonderful piece worth listening to on its own in any incarnation, though my personal favorite has to be the one included in Leaf Piano Collection Volume 1. Also, I have to say that Moonface, the vocal version of the ending theme for Shizuku Renewal, is probably one of the best ending themes in Eroge ever. The voice acting as well is absolutely fantastic as expected from a Leaf title, though the game didn't launch with it since you can't exactly cram 10 hours of voice acting into a VN on 5 floppy disks. Renewal in all its mighty CD and DVD power allowed Leaf to use their status and money to bring on a handful of notable VAs to breathe new life into the characters. That includes Takuchi Hiroko as Saori, Goto Yuko as Mizuho, and wait, Tobita Nobuo as the antagonist? Yes, seriously, Camille from Zeta Gundam plays the antagonist of the story, and it is quite possibly my favorite part of the game, and it seems to be many others too, given that a lot of his dialogue has reached meme status on the Japanese internet since long ago. He leans heavily into the absurdity and cheesiness of that character's unhinged ramblings, and it is a blast. Just listen to the first bad ending monologue.
Sex. みんなセックスし続けろ。激しく。もっと激しく。ペニスとバギナをこすり合って、愛液と精液を混ぜ合って、肉と肉がとろけ合うまで交わり続けろ。いずれは学校中の生徒も参加させてやる。善人面した教師たちもだ。学校中の女たちの穴という穴すべてに精液を流し込んでやる。
This goes on for 2 minutes, by the way. Anyways, this voice acting alone is worth getting the Renewal version up and running for above any other, which is saying a lot because this release might be the most trouble I have had getting any old visual novel working in a long while. I went through hell trying to find any way I could to make this work on modern Windows, and in the end, had to resort to All Reliable. See, it booted. Shizuku Renewal has 2 unique versions. The first was released standalone in 2004, running on an old version of the XLVNS engine which does not play nice with text hooking programs, and the second was bundled with Kizuato's second remake in 2009, which does play nice with a bit of help. I've added a link in the public Patreon post containing the freeware tools necessary to get that working. Both, however, have a critical flaw. Getting them to run at a proper speed is a roulette. Up until now, as I'm halfway through editing this, I could not get these games to run at a normal speed on Windows 10. Everything was going turbo fast, and I wrote this whole segment about how 3D games sometimes use kind of screwy math back in the early days to run quicker, and it gets wonky on newer, faster computers. I was certain something like that was happening here. I was certain I understood the logic behind this game not working right on my computer, and then it just started working right again as I went to get footage. So I don't even know anymore, man. I give up. Can we just talk about the spoilers now? I want to talk about the spoilers and the funny Camille villain, man. This is about the time I'm going to get into full spoiler territory, complete with a plot recap and examination of what themes are here. So if you want to play the game for yourself, then I would recommend skipping ahead to the end of the video for my closing thoughts. But first, let's take a moment to thank all the cool and wonderful patrons, donators, and sponsors that make this possible, and shout out some neat people from the community that you should check out. Hello again, friends, and welcome to the mid-video break, the time to give life updates, channel updates, news, and thank all the donors and sponsors who make this content possible. Since this video got finished at record pace for me, it's only been like 2.5 weeks since the last one, there aren't many new updates on a life or channel front this time. As always though, I want to thank everyone who donates to make this stuff possible. The Patreon and Ko-fi combined, even after Patreon's ongoing payment processor issues, hit over $1,400 this month, which was awesome to see. Y'all are the real MVPs and heroes, seriously. I cannot express my thanks to everyone who makes this possible enough, but I can sure try, so thank you so much. And in the continuing effort to give back to the community that makes this possible, I would like to again shout out someone from my ongoing Twitter thread of cool artists of stuff. Initially it was just videos, but I don't know, I think diversifying is good, and I'm also running a bit low on people, so hence it's only one proper shout out this time. So if you'd like to possibly be featured in another video, then drop a line here or send me an ask on Tumblr or something. I am always looking for more things to peruse and shout out. Y'all do cool work, whether that's videos or video games or music videos or whatever the heck you do. I want to to see it. Anywho, today's channel is Zed, who primarily makes video essays, with the one that stood out to me being his video on Cave Story. That's well-trodden ground for people making videos on YouTube, but I found his to be unique with its focus on the game's legacy as much as the game itself. The history leading up to it and the nature of indie games themselves, the impact it had and the many controversies that have come with it. It's a really good watch, as is the rest of his content I've seen. Check him out if you get a chance. He's got great editing, great writing, and way too few subs and views. And while we're on the topic of shoutouts and credits and things like that, I again want to thank Castell for helping out with this video. As they have done many times in the past, they provided all the translations in this, helped a ton of research pointers and discussions, and it all gave me ideas of where to go with the game. They're just good people. If you have the time to read some short games, then definitely go to their itch.io and check out their interactive fiction. I haven't read all of it, but I very much enjoyed what I have. No bias, I promise, just go check it out. Alright, one last thing before we wrap up this segment, and that's thanking the sponsor of this video, Very OK Vinyl. If you haven't seen my previous shoutouts to them, they're a small company out of Ontario, Canada that sells records of soundtracks to games and other cool stuff, ranging from smaller titles like Dysfunctional Systems to big releases such as the very recently announced Steins Gate vinyl. Coming up for pre-order later this month, it's looking to be absolutely fantastic just as all their other releases, with stylish black and white vinyls and some gorgeously detailed packaging that's sure to look amazing even when not being listened to. And given how fantastic their other releases sound, I have all the reason to believe that it's going to be an incredible way to listen to an iconic score. So if you would like to secure your copy of the Steins Gate vinyl, make sure to go to the Very OK Vinyl website and sign up for the newsletter to be there when it drops. And while you're there, check out their other releases like Rusty, Signalis, or any of the other countless soundtracks they carry from other distributors, like Bomberman Hero, Elfen Lied, or Gradius Gaiden. Links in a description to the site, and thank you once again to Very OK Vinyl for sponsoring this video. Alright, that's all for this time, and once again I want to thank everyone who makes these videos possible. Even though this video turned out way more negative than I wanted it to be, I still had a good time making it, and I'm always happy knowing the people will enjoy this stuff. I think there's something special about having a job that has the power to entertain people and help them learn something new, and I feel lucky to have something like that. I could not be more appreciative of each and every one of you that makes this possible. So, thank you! And if you would like to help support the show, have your name scroll by on the side like all the cool people on the side of the screen, get updates, cuts with no censor, sometimes see videos early, suggest titles, and access to a list of games to cover, and participate in Q&As, then consider donating monthly on Patreon on Ko-fi, or just one time on Ko-fi. Either platform is fine, you'll get the same benefits, I am just impossibly grateful for any support either way. And that goes for non-monetary support too. Liking these videos, leaving nice comments, subscribing, sharing them around is all really important. The last especially as Twitter or Zwitter or whatever continues to explode and make growth harder. Again, just thank you everyone. I'm happy I can make content that so many people enjoy and seem to learn something from. And with all that said, let's get back to the show. More so than many other VNs from the 90s I've covered, Shizuku's story is very short, so much so that it shouldn't take much time to recap the whole thing. And for what it's worth, I'll be following the events of Ruriko's route where it deviates, since as previously mentioned, Saori and Mizuho's follow a lot of the same beats. The part between the common route and climax is a fair bit different, but most of what happens here is inconsequential ramblings about burgers. Following the intro of the game with Kaneko going mad, Yusuke being assigned by his uncle to crack the case, and him meeting with the free heroine, Saori and Mizuho both end up offering him help. The former because she thinks the paranormal is lame and wants to prove it's all a load of crap, and the latter because she wants to save Kaneko and figure out who hurt her. Rejecting both their offers for different reasons and in his mind to keep them safe, he instead goes to find Ruriko on the rooftop, intrigued by the conversation the two had earlier where she claims that her and Yusuke are alike, that he has the potential to use greater Denpa powers than anyone else. She greets him and asks if he was brought there by her transmissions, and when he earnestly replies no, she holds his hands and uses her powers on him. He blacks out and sees a dream, one of Ruriko, sad and alone, as the voice of an unknown man apologizes to her over and over again, a voice that seems distraught and confused by the world and his own love for her. Yusuke wakes later, next to her, to find her in a deep sadness, one which she responds to his worries about by asking him about his own, reiterating again that the two are alike and understand each other, and encouraging them to stick together. They soon begin investigating the school grounds, quickly stumbling into where all the nightly gatherings are happening, and soon find out the truth behind the mysterious gatherings. Yusuke finds in a dim room a man who he'd only briefly seen earlier, Ruriko's brother, Takuya Tsukishima, now somehow orchestrating illicit deeds between a few of the female students, including a bandage-wrapped Kaneko. There's 4 other women there too, 2 with the same dead look in their eyes as Kaneko, and 2 stunned by the horrors they find themselves stuck in, Saori and Mizuho both protesting everything happening. When asked what he's doing and why, Takuya explains his powers to intimidate them. He can control incredible poisonous electric waves, the Doku Denpa, and manipulate the human body and mind with them, making them bend to his will and eventually destroying their consciousness consciousness when he's bored of the human dolls, just as he did the Konako. His goal? Simply to escape the painful, boring real world and allow others to as well, or as Yusuke describes it, to open the doors to madness and escape reality. Once Yusuke's had enough of watching his friends get mercilessly sexually abused, he decides to jump in and take on Takuya himself with Ruriko left outside. That goes about as well as you'd expect, with him becoming subject to the wacky wonder waves and doing Takuya's grotesque biddings, nearly dying in the process, before Ruriko steps in and causes Takuya to snap with a great sense of guilt over something. She and Yusuke take the opportunity to escape from the room and avoid any more exposure to his Doku Denpa, fleeing to the gymnasium where the two find time to make love and for her to explain her past to Yusuke. When she was young, her parents died in a car accident, leaving her and her brother alone. They eventually ended up taken in by their aunt and abusive uncle, and after those two divorced, Ruriko and Takuya became increasingly more withdrawn from the world, even more so when they found themselves unable to make friends in school, becoming each other's only people for support. As time went on, things didn't get any better. The uncle found himself in a cycle of finding new women, going on a one-night stand and leaving for the next, the kids dragged along every single time, exposed night in, night out to the constant noise of people unknown moaning in homes they'd never seen before and would never see again. His uncle's unhealthy habits corrupted Takuya's perspective on affection and relationships until eventually, 1 year ago, he assaulted Ruriko in a supposed act of love, traumatizing her. She distanced herself from him in response, and in turn, he began to feel even more isolated from the world. Unable to understand why what he considered love was cruelty, he decided to use his newfound Denpa powers to escape from the pain, now attempting to subjugate others. This whole time, Ruriko had been searching for someone more powerful than her. She knows she's too weak and incapable of fighting against her brother, but Yusuke's Denpa is so powerful that he might be able to rival him and reach his emotions to set things straight. And now, understanding what's happened, the two finish their deeds and make their way back to Takuya to finish things once and for all. Him and Takuya fight intensely using their competing Doku Denpa powers, both taking blow after blow, until Yusuke finally comes out on top, and he uses his powers to travel into where all of this began, in Takuya's mind palace. Upon peering in, he finds only one thing: a scared young boy alone on the bed, unable to grasp why his beloved sister and only friend is separated from him, who wants things to go back to the way they were. Though Yusuke initially wants to lash out at him and leave him destroyed, he realizes that Takuya is just another victim of abuse, one repeating a cycle he's unwittingly become part of. He doesn't deserve a cruel condemnation, but rather an understanding of his feelings that doesn't forget the gravity of the sins he's committed. Whether or not those can be forgiven is for Ruriko to decide, though Yusuke is certain that she will. And the moment he leaves his mind, they hold each other tight for the first time in a long time. By the next day, things had returned back to normal. Kanako is released from the hospital and is again going to school, with all persons involved in the case having their memories erased by Yusuke's final burst of Denpa powers. Ruriko's traumatic memories of assault, Takuya's wrongdoings and guilt, and everything about the Denpa is gone, allowing everyone to finally have a peaceful life. But Ruriko sends one last transmission to Yusuke, telling him that she'll never forget him. Shizuku's story is bad, to put it lightly, but before I go into everything that I don't like here, I at least want to give credit to something I think it explores serviceably well: the desire for something greater in life than the monotony of the everyday, and how that can drive people to do things they otherwise wouldn't. Yusuke fantasizes about the destruction of the world because the world feels like nothing as it is. Takuya uses his powers for evil because the weight of his sins and the monotony of the world torments him, and Saori in her ending goes on to describe how her classmates, everyday people, do things that others would consider uncouth, like sex work, just to feel something. All of these anxieties about the emptiness of daily life and the want for something greater than it are reflected in the game's sequences depicting Yusuke falling into insanity. Even if I do think they're more amusing than anything meaningful or deeply relatable, and certainly don't compare to Sayoshi's startling moments of madness, they do work well to show how normal people can fall into desires for chaos and horror. Unfortunately, I don't think the game ever goes far enough with interrogating this part of the story. Mizuho's route does nothing to touch on it, Ruriko's pulls it in a wildly different direction that it only pertains to Takuya's character and trauma, which just leaves Saori as the only one with something to say. And it's, well, it is what it is. The ultimate statement delivered through an extremely on-the-nose monologue is that even a monotonous life has joy in it through the small things, and we should focus on those. Do I disagree with that? No, not really. My last video on Parfait is all about how the little things in life can be enough to keep us going, that other people alone are worth living for, and it's a philosophy that I personally find keeps me grounded in life and I try to instill in others. But Shizuku ends up concluding it in such a surface-level, unsubtle self-help book kind of way that I think it fails to land, unlike Parfait, or for a more apt comparison, Shin Yukikimi, which is another horror title touching on similar ideas of meaning in a torturous life. Another thing I want to give some praise to is Takuya as a villain. He's at least vaguely interesting. Not great, mind you. His plan to take over the world using evil electromagnetic ways that just makes everyone fuck a ton is cheesy, presented in ways that come off as absurd and weird at best and hilariously tone-destroying at worst. But I think the complexities of the emotions that guide his actions, sorrow over his own grave mistakes turned into childish, vengeful lust, are kinda neat in theory. But that's the nicest I can be to this game in terms of story, because it is otherwise a train wreck. For starters, let's talk about one of the many elephants in the room: the fact that women get damn near no agency. Yuriko's route probably allows for the most of any woman in the entire story, with her stepping in to save Yusuke and being the one to decide whether or not Takuya's sin should be forgiven, given the keys to decide how to proceed forward with her own trauma and pain. But that kinda doesn't make up for the fact she's otherwise a passive actor in the plot. She quite literally just waits around for someone to take care of her problems, which happens to be Yusuke with his big, strong man Denpa powers that outwit her tiny baby girl Denpas, him taking care of all the obstacles so she can do the final emotional part of the work. And again, this is the woman with the most agency. Asari has to be saved multiple times and does absolutely nothing except suck Yusuke's mosaic privates the whole route about how cool and smart he is, and Mizuho is portrayed as the shy, weak one who has to rely on others for protection and help, unable to do anything herself as she cowers in fear and sadness. It is painful, to say the least, coming off of having just reviewed games like Shinryuku and Gun Katana, games which acknowledge how full of pain and a spare life can be, yet still has women that fight for their beliefs against all odds, to play something that cares so little about its characters. It is insulting, honestly even bordering on misogynistic, and yet somehow not the worst part of the story. No, the worst part is that ending where the game cops out of every single thing it tries to do, every single theme it was building up towards, and displays a complete lack of understanding of how trauma works. Because for most of Ruriko's route, what it seems to be building up to is an earnest look at trauma in what wants to be a mature way. That dream sequence at the start of her path tips the viewer off to something deeper happening with her, and while it's not exactly subtle, it's not visceral or explicit either. It has evocative imagery, it has interesting prose, and it shows a level of care that could have easily built up to something great, something which her flashback in the gymnasium expands on. I really love how this segment is framed. It's told entirely through text on black screens and with CGs meant to evoke the feeling of old, long-worn photographs. At first, they perfectly capture the lamentation of innocent times long gone, and in the end, with the last one of Takuya, a haunting visage of those times coming to a brutal, senseless end. The game doesn't go into explicit, excruciating detail over the abuse like it so loves doing to its women in the rest of the game, instead keeping it brief. A few sentences that are pointed, striking, and blunt about what happened, and the rest focusing on the damage it caused her. It's seriously good, subtle storytelling that gets across the horror of abuse without showing it in more detail than absolutely necessary. I also like the scene of Yusuke delving into Takuya's mind palace, legitimately trying to understand his feelings so the two can try not to live in fear and sadness of each other, even if not bond again because of the gravity of his misdeeds. Again, it's mature storytelling that shows how abusers are often people who are formerly abused, and it doesn't disregard the feelings of the completely innocent, followed by quite possibly the most powerful moment of the game as the two hug and Takuya accepts how much he's hurt the one he cares the most about. But none of that matters, because Yusuke simply decides the right thing to do is to just erase all the memories of everything from everyone involved. And the game unequivocally seems to see it as a good thing. It's even fine that he did this without telling anyone, which is totally not fucked up and doesn't at all violate anyone's autonomy to their own emotions and feelings. The mere idea of erasing trauma to make it okay is painfully ignorant of how and why it happens. People don't do bad things out of the blue for no reason. There are complex reasons that lead to them committing bad acts, something this game even acknowledges literal minutes before. Hell, its only other well-developed theme is about how life wears people down. Did erasing their memories give those two a better home? Did it take away all those nights away from home, scared that wore them down? Did it change Takuya's broken perspective on love and affection? No, it just put the adhesive side of a bandage over a wound. Without solving those complex reasons, and now without the memory of it even happening, it's just liable to be repeated. Not only that, but the mere idea of just erasing traumatic memories, not anything else, just the memories, is beyond flawed. Speaking as someone who's been diagnosed with complex PTSD, where memories of events that traumatize me are all scattered and fragmented, your body keeps as much of a score as your mind does, even when your mind can't keep that score. Even when you can't remember what happened, you have reactions to it that you don't understand. You become senselessly scared, you hide, you cry, you avoid people, you do everything you can to escape from a gut feeling of danger that you don't understand. To pull out a very painful recent example that's relevant to this, I have been molested, almost raped by someone I really trusted. Late last year, in fact, and I didn't realize that's what had happened for months. I put it out of my mind, I didn't recognize it, yet most sexual things just felt wrong for me. It blew up to a point where something adjacent coming to my attention, for reasons I couldn't understand then, gave me a mental break that probably would have led to me taking my life had I not had people around to keep me from doing so. Memory is not the only thing that matters with trauma. It changes you in ways that are almost impossible to perceive. On a subconscious level, on a genetic level, and simply not having those memories doesn't change that. And I know what the implication is here of this ending. It's that the magic cool radio waves solved everything and that none of this is even consideration because everything is fine. But that's the exact problem. None of this, the realities of how abuse happens, nor the realities of how trauma warps a person, was considered when writing. That one decision in the game's true ending, to erase everything to give some pseudo-bullshit happy ending, I feel says more about Shizuku as a story than anything else, and explains so aptly why this game frustrates me more than any other VN I've read. It says that there was no intent to speak about trauma, about sexual assault, about forgiveness. It's merely drama. Insulting, lowbrow drama, serious issues minimized and reduced to filler for the metaphorical pages of a digital book, failing to say anything meaningful or pay any respects to people who have been hurt, beyond what was necessary to elicit sympathy. This was not an of its time thing. Elf had been releasing games that questioned the very nature of dating simulators and erotic games as a genre and did it well. Fairy Tail put out a game that actually seriously explores cycles of destruction and cults and does it maturely. Alicesoft made an RPG that tore apart the idea of a heroic male protagonist and forced players to realize how treating women purely as objects had consequences. But Shizuku? Shizuku's story is one that's afraid of committing to any meaning. It's a story that's afraid of saying anything that rocks the boat. It's a story that does everything it does purely so it can shock readers by being different from what was available at the time. It is an empty, cowardly story. I wanted to like Shizuku. I wanted to buck the trend of literally everyone I know who's played it telling me, hey, this game kinda sucks, and say, actually, I think it's cool. After all, I try to be a positive person, especially with video games. I mean, working in game dev for 6 years tends to give you a lot of patience with video games, but I can't with this game. Shizuku is one of the only things I've ever read that made me feel hurt after I finished reading it. Not vulnerable or torn open to think about myself in a way that's genuinely good, but just actually hurt. It's a game that minimizes trauma and sexual abuse and the poorly executed drama to sell a story that is at best horrendously middling. It's a game that has zero respect for the women in its cast and treats them as one-dimensional caricatures, and it's a game that fails at almost every single thing it sets out to do. It is a bad adventure game, a bad erotic game, a bad mystery novel, and an all-around bad story. I get why this game has a legacy, I really do. In the context of early 1996, it was truly unique in ways. No other sound novel-like game or even really any adventure game was this kind of sci-fi light psychological horror. The closest that probably existed was Isaku by Elf, which had no sci-fi elements and was more about the tension that a killer could be lurking around anywhere. It honed in heavily on the psychological aspect of such a situation, to the point I would basically call it psychological horror at points, but it's no Doku Denpa waves, nor are there any gestures towards confronting broad ideas of madness. And Shizuku's specific combination of traits was special, too. A sound novel presentation of anime sprites on a home computer was novel, its structure was simple, and all that combined seemed to be enough to give it street cred, directly and indirectly leading to a number of major series like Fate Stay Night, Clannad, and many others. To quote Higurashi Numineko writer Ryukishi 7, thinking about it, my little brother was the one who introduced me to Shizuku and Kizuato. I walked this path thanks to him. The success of it also led to Leaf continuing to push on more and more of influential releases, and Takahashi with it. The man grew as a writer fast, and nowadays works on things that I'm sure a lot of my audience loves. Like, did you know he's wrote a bunch for Idolmaster, Tokyo Ravens, Kiniro Mosaic, The World God Only Knows? He's got a lot of talent, and I know people who hated this game that adore his other Leaf works, like Two Heart. He's a cool guy, and I have a ton of respect for him as an artist, crappy first work notwithstanding. Also, because I know people will infinite combo me if I don't mention this, Shizuku is one of the games that served as a source of characters for the Leaf fighting game series Queen of Heart, made by French Bread, the same people who would go on to make Under Night, Dengeki Bunko, and Melty Blood, forever blessing us poverty fighting game players from 1998 until the end of time, amen. Anywho, this is without even mentioning the whole legacy of Denpa, which is maybe more complicated than it seems because the narrative around the genre seems woefully detached from the actual genre. Many people claim that it started with Shizuku and then the big free happened years later, Sayonara Oshiete, Tui no Sora, and Jisatsu 101. But as I talked about in my videos on Sayo Oshi and Jisatsu, as well as honorary Denpa Fushigi Densha, Denpa, the grouping of all these things together is a posthumous invention. Sayoshi's writer never read Shizuku and simply wanted to write the tradition of nonsensical Eroguro stories. Tsui no Sora's writer denied the label, and Jisatsu 101's writer did the same. He kinda just wanted to write sci-fi. Playing this also made me question again just what the hell Denpa even is. It's most loosely definable as psychological horror, primarily about cult Skull and caste within Skull or society, but Shizuku only lightly touched on those, and it hardly goes into the kind of unhinged reality-questioning madness one might expect. It's mostly corny B-movie sci-fi, a far cry from Sayoshi's constantly disintegrating reality or Jisatsu's broken nonsense, both of which are also hard to categorize. If anything, Shizuku is just building on the ideas that Otsuki Kenji attempted to explore in his novel without engaging in the larger Denpa-kei subculture that I've rambled on about in all my other Denpa videos, a subculture which spans back to at least the 80s with roots going far further back. I'm not going to say anything absurd like Shizuku isn't Denpa or something, because it clearly is a part of the canon of the genre and a part of the subculture, but I also can't help but wonder if a major part of its role in that genre is due in part to aspects of the game which have outlived and subsumed its larger identity. If you only know Shizuku for Camille's Zeta Gundam shouting about everyone shagging, if you only know Shizuku for Ruriko's quiet demeanor and obsession with radio waves, if you only know Shizuku for the half-dozen scenes of total madness, then it seems like a pretty cool game with some subversive vibes. But that's only part of Shizuku and only an aspect of its legacy in the larger visual novel genre, or to be more apt, the Japanese adventure game genre. While I'm not normally someone to fuss over differences in terms for things between languages, this is one I think matters because people seem to have an idea in their mind that visual novel as a genre is totally distinct from the larger adventure game genre, which just isn't true. Choice-based games like Shizuku, and the sound novel titles of which it almost directly copies its game design from, are a simplification of the design ideas of verb-based graphic Japanese adventure games, something which can be traced all the way back to 1985 with Portopia on the Famicom. They just remove all excess offered by the verb interactivity in favor of interactivity only where it matters for telling the story, because as developers have discovered, the adventuring machine still works without those moving parts, perhaps even better if they're not in active use for the plot. Developers had been experimenting with that simplification well before this title. There's a handful of PC-98 games with no interactivity beyond choices, and Alicesoft even released a whole linear novel sequel to their RPG, Toshin Toshi 2, that's just artwork accompanied by text. And in the same vein, developers continue to experiment with complex game systems after this to great success. Tons of popular adventure games in the late 90s and early 2000s, games labeled as adventure games just as visual novels are in Japan, use additional gameplay systems ranging from simple to complex, and even now we still see some more complex releases like Paranormasight by Zine. Shizuku showing a lot of people a simpler way of doing adventure gaming did not kill the rest of adventure gaming, and it did not start the era of visual novels. All it did was take well understood and then popular sound novel design and stick some anime artwork into it. It really was just another game. So at the end of it all, if it's not already clear, I can't recommend Shizuku. As a product detached from its era, it is a depressing, frustrating read. As a story part of the Denpa canon, it is the least interesting and least impactful of all that I've read. As a game of its time, it's only interesting for the cultural impact it had. And as a part of Leaf's legacy, it's only interesting for how it saved the company and paved the way for some genuinely great releases. While there are some interesting ideas buried deep within here, I can't recommend reading this over experiencing media that explores those same ideas but markedly better. If you want a psychological horror game about cycles of abuse, then go read 2006 Gore Screaming Show. It's translated, it's my personal game of the year for that year, and a title that means a ton to me. If you want messy and soulful Denpa with commentary on big topics, then go read Jisatsu 101. It's kind of a wreck, but it's got cool vibes and a lot of neat ideas. I did a whole video on it a while back. And if you want something that explores trauma in depth and how it becomes a part of you that cannot be solved simply by erasing it, then watch Blue Reflection Ray. It's a show that bears a lot of importance to me both for personal reasons and because I think its exploration of trauma is second to none. Maybe someday, just like Leaf's White Album got a big remake that revised many of the mechanics in the script, Shizuku will surface again with its problem solved, expanded into something larger and greater than it ever had been before. But as it stands, as a part of the past, it's a title I can recommend to nobody, a title that has nothing to offer anyone anymore, its day long gone and its shadow hidden by the works it inspired. Shizuku is an empty, hollow shell of a story.